My name's Sherry, and life's been kicking me hard these days. Just 6 months ago, I walked out of what was supposed to be my forever love story. Add to that, my grandma's losing herself to dementia, and it feels like the walls are closing in on me. I was at my job at the local library, trying to focus on re-shelving books, but my mind was miles away with Grandma. That's when my best friend, Jess, walked in, her face all scrunched up with worry the way it does when she's about to give me a piece of her mind. "Sherry, you look like hell," Jess stated bluntly, her hands on her hips. "Thanks, Jess, you always know how to cheer me up," I replied, the sarcasm dripping from every word. "No, seriously, Sherry. This ain't healthy. You need help, someone professional to talk to," she insisted, her gaze softening. I knew she was right. The sleepless nights and constant anxiety were wearing me down. So, I sighed. "Maybe you're right. Do you know anyone?" She nodded eagerly. "Dr. Fisher. Heard he's good with cases like yours. I'll text you his details." I wasn't sure about spilling my guts to a stranger, but something had to give. The very next day, I found myself sitting in Dr. Fisher's office, a cozy room with soft light and too many diplomas on the wall. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor that made the room feel safer. "So, Sherry, tell me what's been troubling you," he began, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Where do I even start?" I thought. "It's everything. I left my fiancé, my grandma's sick, and I just feel stuck," I managed to say, the words tumbling out. Dr. Fisher nodded, jotting down notes. "It sounds like you're carrying a heavy load. Let's unpack that together, shall we?" As the sessions went on, I found myself telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. He never judged, just listened and offered the occasional, or, "I see." It was like unclogging years of pent-up fear and sadness. One particular day, I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the world. I actually smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. That night, at my small apartment, as I was heating up some canned soup, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Fisher, something about a follow-up appointment. I stared at the screen for a long moment. This guy was becoming my lifeline, and part of me hated that I needed him so much. The days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, 2 years had passed since I first stepped into Dr. Fisher's office. I started feeling like I could breathe again without a boulder pressing on my chest. I even managed to laugh genuinely at a joke Jess made. It was during one of these lighter moments that my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I picked it up anyway. "Hello, Sherry, it's Dr. Fisher," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. "Dr. Fisher? Is everything okay?" I asked, a hint of worry creeping into my voice. Yes, everything's fine. I was calling to discuss your progress and, perhaps extend an invitation," he said, a nervous chuckle following his words. "An invitation?" I echoed, curiosity piqued. "Yes, I thought, perhaps, we could meet for a coffee, outside the office. You've made tremendous progress, and I think it might be beneficial to see things from a new perspective," he suggested. I paused, chewing my lip. This was uncharted territory. "Isn't that, like, against some rule or something?" I finally asked. There was a brief silence. "Well, you're not my patient anymore. I thought it might be nice to catch up in a more relaxed setting," he replied. Something about the way he said it made me agree. "Okay, sure, coffee sounds nice," I said, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. We met at a local cafe the following Saturday. It was weird seeing him outside the office, in jeans and a casual shirt. He looked normal, almost like a different person. "You look well, Sherry," he said as he greeted me with a warm smile. "Thanks, Dr. Fisher. I feel better too," I replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Please, call me Robert. We're not in the office now," he said with a light laugh. I nodded, feeling a bit awkward. "Okay, Robert." The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his love for hiking and how he always wanted to visit the Grand Canyon. I shared my newfound love for painting, a hobby I took up as a form of therapy. As we sipped our coffee, he leaned in, his eyes serious, but kind. "Sherry, I've seen you grow and overcome so much. You're incredibly strong, you know that?" I blushed, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "Thanks, I guess I had a good therapist," I replied with a small smile. He chuckled. "Well, I can't take all the credit. You did the hard work." The cafe began to empty as we continued talking, oblivious to the time passing. It was only when the waiter came to clean up that we realized hours had flown by. "Guess we better head out," I said, feeling a twinge of disappointment. Robert stood up, offering a hand to help me up. "Sherry, I've enjoyed this more than I thought. Would you be interested in doing this again? Maybe dinner next time?" I hesitated, a mix of excitement and caution swirling inside me. But looking into his sincere eyes, I found myself nodding. "Yeah, dinner sounds great." The initial charm of our dinners and casual meetups quickly turned into a full-blown romance. Before I knew it, Robert and I were inseparable. He was attentive, caring, and always there to lend a hand, especially with Grandma's situation. I thought I'd hit the jackpot, that my life was finally taking a turn for the better. But after the wedding, the man I married started to change, or maybe his true colors began to show. It started subtly. He'd make comments about my friends, "You're better off without them," or "They don't really care about you." At first, I brushed it off as overprotectiveness, but then it got worse. He became possessive, needing to know where I was every minute of the day. His control seeped into every aspect of my life. He insisted I quit my job, saying he didn't want me to stress about work. "You don't need to work. I can provide everything. Trust me, Sherry," he'd say, his voice firm. But it wasn't about the money. It was about freedom, about having something that was just mine. Yet, I found myself nodding along, resigning from my job, and becoming entirely dependent on him. That was his plan all along. Then came the isolation. He'd check my phone, monitor my calls and texts. "Who are you talking to? Why are you laughing? Tell me," he'd demand, his eyes wild with an unsettling intensity. "It's just Jess, you know her," I'd stutter out, feeling like a child caught in a lie. He'd snort. "Jess, huh? She's no good for you. I don't want you talking to her anymore." It was insane. I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him, my voice shaking but loud. "I can't do this, Robert. I can't live like you're my warden. I need my life back." He just laughed, a cold, heartless sound that echoed through the house. "Your life? Sherry, your life is with me now. And if you even think about leaving, what about your grandmother? Without me, she's back on the streets. Remember that." I was trapped. Every time I thought about standing up to him, about leaving, the image of my sweet, confused grandma being thrown out of the care facility would stop me dead in my tracks. I was caught in a web of his making, every move calculated to keep me under his thumb. Nights became my only solace, the only time I could cry without fear of reprimand. I'd lay in bed, the man I thought I loved snoring next to me, and wonder how I got here. How did the charming, caring man I married turn into this monster? I realized too late that the signs were there from the beginning. His need for control, his dismissal of my friends, his insistence on me quitting my job. I was blinded by the need for love, for someone to care. And now, I was paying the price. I had to do something, anything. I couldn't live like this, not really living at all. But every time I thought about acting, his threats against my grandmother would paralyze me. It was a vicious cycle of fear, control, and utter hopelessness. And I had no idea how to break free. After months of being under Robert's thumb, I felt like I was fading away, becoming a ghost in my own life. The vibrant, independent woman I once was had been replaced by a shadow, flinching at the sound of his voice, jumping at the slam of a door. The house felt like a prison, and Robert was the warden, his rules the chains binding me. One evening, as we sat in what was supposed to be our cozy living room, the tension was particularly thick. I was on edge, trying to appear small, invisible, but he was like a storm, brewing and ready to burst. "Why don't you ever look at me when I talk to you?" Robert snapped suddenly, his eyes narrow slits. I flinched. I'm sorry, I was just thinking about something. Always thinking, always in your head. You're here with me, remember that. I'm your husband. His voice rose with each word, the last almost a shout. I nodded, murmuring apologies, trying to placate the rising fury in him. But it was no use. He was in one of his moods, and there was no calming the storm. "You know what? I've had enough of this attitude. You need to learn." His voice was cold, calculated. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Robert, please, you're hurting me," I cried out, fear overtaking me. He dragged me to the small storage room, the one place I hated the most. It was dark, windowless, a tiny box of a room. "Maybe some time in the dark will teach you to appreciate what you have," he hissed, pushing me inside. I stumbled, falling to the cold floor as he slammed the door shut, plunging the room into complete darkness. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. I've always been terrified of the dark, a fear I once shared with him, back when I thought he cared. "Robert, please. Let me out. I'm scared of the dark, remember?" I shouted, my voice cracking. His laughter was the last thing I heard before his footsteps faded away. There I was, alone in the dark, the weight of my situation crushing me. I curled up in a corner, my body shaking with sobs. Time passed, I don't know how long. It felt like an eternity. Every creak and whisper of the house made me jump, my imagination conjuring monsters in the shadows. But the real monster was just outside the door, the man I had married. Finally, the door creaked open, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. "Have we learned our lesson?" Robert's voice dripped with mockery. I couldn't speak, couldn't look at him. I just nodded, anything to get out of that room. He pulled me up, his grip still tight but slightly less punishing. "Good. Remember this feeling, Sherry. Remember who's in charge here." As I stumbled back to the living room, my legs weak and my eyes adjusting to the light, I felt a deep, burning shame. How had I let it come to this? How had I become someone so weak, so controlled? But beneath the shame and fear, a spark of something else flickered. Anger. I was angry at him for treating me this way, and angry at myself for allowing it. That dark room had been a wake-up call. I couldn't live like this, couldn't let him snuff out the last bit of me. Amidst the despair of my darkening world, a glimmer of unexpected hope emerged. I discovered I was pregnant. As I held the positive test, a wave of emotions overtook me, fear, uncertainty, but also a fierce protective love. I clung to the hope that this news might soften Robert, maybe even bring back a trace of the man I had fallen in love with. With a trembling heart, I approached him that evening. "Robert, I have something to tell you. We're going to have a baby." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face contorted not into joy, but into a furious scowl. "A baby? No. That's not going to happen, Sherry." I recoiled, the harshness of his words cutting through me. "But it's our child," I pleaded. "Maybe this can change things, make them better." He was unyielding, his voice icy as he spat out his next words. "No, Sherry. It's going to change nothing. You're going to get rid of it." I felt a surge of defiance against his cruel demand. "No, I won't do that. This child is part of me." In a rage, he grabbed my arm, his fingers pressing into my flesh painfully. "You don't understand, do you? You're mine, everything you have is mine. Your fears, your body, your future." I struggled, but he was too strong. "Robert, please, let me go." Instead of relenting, he dragged me to a small, locked room in the back of our house, a place he knew I avoided at all costs. The room was dark, damp, and crawling with spiders, my deepest, most paralyzing fear. With a shove, I was inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The sound of the lock clicking was like a death knell. My heart raced, and I could hear the skittering of spiders in the darkness. I was trapped, the small space closing in on me, the creeping terror of the spiders consuming me. "Let's see how long your maternal instincts last now," he taunted from the other side of the door. I screamed, pounded on the door, but it was useless. The hours stretched on in that dark, horrifying space. My mind raced with fear for myself and my unborn child. How could I bring a life into this nightmare? Eventually, the door opened. Robert's silhouette filled the doorway, a smirk on his face. "Well, have you thought it over? Will you get rid of the problem now?" Weak, terrified, but resolute, I whispered through my tears, "No." That defiance cost me dearly. He left me there longer, the spiders, my only company. The last thing I remember is falling to the floor and fainting. Waking up in the sterile white of the hospital room, I was momentarily disoriented, the beeping machines and four-line foreign intruders in my muddled consciousness. Memories flooded back, Robert, the spiders, the darkness, and a shudder rippled through me. But amidst the fear, a new sensation bubbled within me, the fierce, protective love for the tiny life growing inside me. I knew I had to act, not just for me, but for my unborn child. As soon as I was alone, I carefully pulled out the phone I had hidden away and dialed my cousin, Mark, who worked in the FBI. His voice was a lifeline as I whispered my situation, each word a mixture of fear and hope. "Mark, it's Sherry. I need help. It's Robert. He's..." My voice broke, the reality of it all threatening to overwhelm me. "Sherry, slow down. Tell me everything." Mark's voice was calm, steady. I recounted everything, each word lifting a bit of the weight off my shoulders. Mark's responses were terse, professional, but underneath I could hear the undercurrent of rage. "Sherry, listen to me. I'm going to help you. We're going to get you out of there, but you need to be strong a little longer. Can you do that?" he asked. I nodded into the phone, a silent promise to myself and my baby. "I can, Mark. I have to." "Good. I'm going to make some calls. We'll act fast. Just hang tight and don't do anything to arouse his suspicion," he instructed. I agreed, the plan forming a fragile lifeline in the chaos. The rest of my hospital stay was a blur of doctors and whispered phone calls, each moment stretching into eternity as I awaited my release. When the day finally came to return home, a heavy dread settled over me. The house that once promised love and safety now loomed like a monster, its walls surely echoing with the screams and tears of the past months. Robert was waiting, his presence filling the room like a dark cloud. I braced myself for the confrontation, the culmination of all the fear and resolve that had been building inside me. "Sherry," Robert began, his voice eerily calm. "You're back. How was the hospital?" I kept my voice steady, masking the storm of emotions within. "It was fine. I'm feeling better," I lied, meeting his gaze with a feigned calmness. He circled around me, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Good, good. Because we need to talk about the situation." His eyes flicked down to my still flat stomach, a sneer curling his lips. I clenched my fists, feeling the baby stir within me. "There's nothing to talk about. I've made my decision." Robert's face twisted into a mask of fury. "Your decision? You think you have a choice here?" I swallowed hard, standing my ground. "Yes, I do. This is my body, my child. I won't let you control me anymore." His laugh was cold, devoid of any real humor. "Oh, Sherry, you never learn, do you? I always have control. Always." But this time was different. I had a plan, a lifeline. I just needed to bide my time, play along until I could make my escape. "I'm tired, Robert. I'm going to bed. I said, turning to leave the room. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "You're not going anywhere until we settle this." That's when the front door burst open, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. Police officers streamed in, their badges glinting, their faces set in grim determination. "Robert Fisher, you're under arrest for the abuse and unlawful imprisonment of Sherry Fisher," one of the officers announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Robert's face went white, his grip on my arm loosening in shock. "This is ridiculous. She's my wife, she's lying." But I wasn't alone this time. Mark strode in behind the officers, his face a mask of brotherly fury. "No, Robert. You're the liar. We have everything. The recordings, the testimonies. It's over." Robert's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. The officers handcuffed him, reading his rights as he continued to splutter denials and threats. As they led him away, his eyes met mine one last time, a mixture of disbelief and rage. But I didn't cower this time. I met his gaze squarely, the fear inside me replaced by a burning sense of justice. After the chaos had died down, Mark came over to me, his expression softening. "Sherry, are you okay?" I nodded, feeling the tears well up. "Yes, I think so. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for everything." He hugged me tightly, a protective brotherly embrace. "Always, Sherry. Always." The house felt eerily quiet after they left, the shadow of Robert's presence still lingering in the corners. But as I sat there, alone yet free, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The confrontation had been terrifying, but it was the first step towards a new life for me and my child. The world seemed brighter, the air fresher, as I stepped into my new life. The chains of fear and control were finally broken, leaving behind a path paved with hope and the promise of a new beginning. With Robert now facing the consequences of his actions, I could finally breathe, finally plan for the future I wanted for me and my baby. I moved back into my old apartment, the familiar walls a welcome embrace. It needed a bit of work, a touch of paint here, a new picture there, but it was mine. As I unpacked a box of old photos and trinkets, a knock came at the door. Opening it, I found Jess, her face breaking into a wide grin. "Sherry! Look at you, free and radiant as ever." I laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Jess, come in. I've missed you." We sat down, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, a pot of coffee between us. "So, what's the plan now?" Jess asked, her eyes shining with excitement. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her question. "First, I'm going back to work. I need to find my feet again, you know? And then, well, then I'll focus on being the best mom I can be." Jess reached over, squeezing my hand. "You're going to be amazing, Sherry. And hey, if you need anything, you know I'm here, right?" I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "I know, Jess. Thank you." As days turned into weeks, I found a rhythm to my new life. I returned to the library, the books and quiet a comforting presence. My co-workers welcomed me back with open arms, their support a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. The pregnancy progressed, each doctor's visit a mixture of nerves and excitement. And then, one cool autumn morning, my son was born. Holding him in my arms, everything else faded away. He was perfect, a tiny beacon of hope and love. The legal battles with Robert were tough, emotionally draining, but I stood firm, bolstered by the support of Mark, Jess, and my legal team. In the end, justice was served. Robert would spend years behind bars, his threats and control finally silenced. I received a settlement, a sum that secured a comfortable future for my son, my grandmother and me. But more than the money, it was the freedom it represented that mattered. I was no longer bound to a man who saw me as nothing more than an object to control. I was free. As my son grew, so did I. I learned to trust again, to laugh without reservation, to love without fear. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and found joy in the little things. One day, as I watched my son play in the park, a thought struck me. We did it, little one. "We're really doing it," I whispered, tears of happiness glimmering in my eyes. He looked up, his little face breaking into a smile, and for a moment, everything was perfect.
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.